That gets me every time.
It does. It never gets old.
I'm sure there's probably somebody watching who's like, it gets old. I'm
It,
sorry.
it doesn't. It doesn't. Shame on you. Yeah.
Good. Good for you. Don't watch the show.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is one of those nighttime episodes, isn't it?
It is. It
Hadn't
is.
had one of those. Hadn't had one of those in a minute. So
It's not often anymore, right? You know.
yeah. Well, I mean, too, we also interview people from around the world, so we have to be accommodating sometimes for some time zones from time to time. But luckily, this episode, we have a more local guest in our frame of the world. So here we are.
Yeah. Well, and I think we'll do what we did last time and do the commercials now.
Yeah.
And then we'll jump in and we'll get going. But other than that, you've been good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Absolutely.
Semester's starting to wind down.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just telling somebody the other day, I was like, I cannot believe that the spring semester is almost over with. I mean, it's like I feel like we just started. But I feel like that's getting to be how it normally is. Once it gets started, it's like up,
and it's gone.
Yeah, and it's gone just like that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, as you mentioned, we do have a guest, but before we get into that, let's go ahead and bring up our commercial run here. Homebrew History is brought to you by Civil War Trails. Civil War Trails is the world's largest outdoor museum with 1,600 different signs and sites that you can visit across the country. Follow the armies as they fought through the greatest conflict in the history of the United States and fought in our defining moment. Be sure to visit Civil War Trails' website down below, get some information there, and if you really want to help Civil War Trails out, request a map by going to their website and ordering a map for your next vacation. Make some history with Civil War Trails. If you want to ask our guest questions just like we get to do, be sure to hop on over to our Buy Me a Coffee page where you can find out how to support Bo and I and keep Homebrew History airing. And speaking of Homebrew History airing, it airs weekly. You can catch us every Monday, except I think once or twice where we ended up having to drop the episode on Tuesday or Wednesday because someone forgot to hit send. It does happen. And our designs, our illustrations, and even our logo right down there in the corner is made by the bearded historian Jeff Williams. Jeff, out there in Franklin, Tennessee, doing the Lord's work. I would call him my successor, but whatever. Anyhow, be sure to, by being the successor, he would have to be less experienced and worse at it than I am, but he's better at it than I am. And he's just generally all around gifted and a much more talented individual than I could ever hope to be. I hope he listens to this show. Otherwise, all the flattery I throw his way just is awful. But if you want to follow along with Jeff, be sure to follow the Bearded Historian and go over to his Etsy page and check out some of the sweet new sick designs he's got out there. He's got the Tombstone line, and I can't think of a better time to buy a Tombstone sticker, especially now in the era without Val Kilmer in this world. What do you do? What do you do? At any rate, we do have a guest, as you mentioned. So what I think we'll do, without further ado, is we'll bring on Derrick. Derrick Lindow is joining us all the way from a very wet and soggy Kentucky to talk a little bit about Kentucky and the Civil War, and then to talk about his book, We Shall Conquer or Die, which I think has got to be one of the sick titles right up there with Conquer or Perish. It seems like you kind of ripped off Tim Smith on that one.
Well, I was lucky to find a good quote. Someone that was involved with one of these little tiny battles, and it's like, man, that was a pretty cool quote to say in such a small little battle. But it worked out good.
It's like what's is it Sergeant Daly that said, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" Yeah. One of those good one-liners. And historians love nothing more than a grab title, and you definitely have it. So, Derrick, before we kind of get into your book, I guess what brought your attention to Kentucky, especially in the Western theater of the war, and because what you've seemingly done in your book is you brought to light some stuff that Civil War historians have kind of overlooked. So I'm actually really interested to get into this. So how'd you get started with Kentucky?
Well, mostly just because I'm from here, and the history that's in the book, a lot of it is just down the road from me, or just a little bit of short drive away. So, growing up around these things and asking questions about what really happened there, and never really getting answers that satisfied me. That kind of drove me to start researching this stuff, and never thought it would turn into a book. I just wanted to research the little battle here in town, and maybe write up a little pamphlet to put at the public library. And then I started researching, it's kind of starting to realize that this is really connected to a lot of other things, and this might be able to turn into a book. And lo and behold, we got a book now.
Is that how it happens? Well,
Yeah.
look at that thing.
Here it is. Here's
That just appeared out of nowhere.
Several years later, I guess.
And that's such a historian thing to do. It's like, I can't find the answers that I want. I'm going to write a whole book about it. Here you go.
So, Derrick, too, I think what we should do before we jump into just the specifics of your book is we should probably talk about Kentucky and its place in the war, because there's that great line, right? Kentucky only became a Confederate state after the war, all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take us through that kind of that crucial moment in 1860-61, secession crisis, and everybody else is going off to war except Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas, and then all of a sudden everybody else is gone, and there sits Kentucky.
Yeah, except for us. Yeah, so I was actually researching for a future project a couple of days ago, and I was reading a regimental history, and they were talking about Kentucky, and the author from Indiana said, Kentucky foolishly or stupidly tried to maintain neutrality. A rather unpatriotic thing to do is what they mentioned. And so Kentucky tried to remain neutral, and where they said that they would pretty much side with whoever didn't invade them. And there was a lot of, I guess you could say, rule bending when it came to that. Because Gideon Pellow, in his infinite wisdom, along with Leonidas Polk, decided to send that little foray up towards Columbus, Kentucky, which breaks that neutrality. But there was a lot of other activity going on during that time. You've got the Kentucky State Guard, which is pretty heavily pro-Southern. And a lot of those men are forming their own companies and marching south into Tennessee. And then you also have these more loyal home guard companies that are doing the same thing, and they're crossing the Ohio River into Indiana and Ohio and joining the units up there. But then you have Bull Nelson. He's from the Navy, actually, before he becomes a general, but he has a camp right there just south of Lexington, and where he's recruiting soldiers, Union soldiers, which that creates a stink for a lot of the pro-Southern side of things. And because this is before the Confederates moved up into Columbus, and the response is kind of like these men are they're kind of forming up for their own defense here. That's kind of one of those examples of where they're bending the whole thing of, we're not violating your neutrality. This is you guys, they're just they're trying to defend themselves here against whatever might come along. But once that neutrality actually is broken by the Confederates, and which I think probably ended up being pretty terrible decision to make, because that opened up that border with Tennessee, where there was not a lot of natural barriers. Having neutral Kentucky is, if Kentucky's on your side or it's neutral, whichever way it is going to be for the South, that's a great barrier to have between you and the Union. And so, as soon as that neutrality is broken, Grant moves right into Paducah, seizes that. They move into Louisville, they cross the river across from Cincinnati, and it's game on from that point on. And for the next several months, really up until Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, you've got the armies maneuvering and sitting and really learning how to be soldiers and learning how to be armies. That's really what my next project's on, is that time of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it is just rife with moments of there's no equipment. There's we don't even have tents, and this is on the Union side of things. The weapons aren't coming in enough. You've got these skeleton regiments, is what they're called. And then you've got these Kentuckians stuck in the middle that are trying to join both sides, and they are caught up in the middle of this. And so the way I like to think about it is, you got the Civil War, where it's North versus South. But in Kentucky, that is where it is a more accurate term to use the word Civil War, I think, because that's where you've got the people, they're fighting each other. You got the neighbors fighting neighbors. People don't trust each other. There's a lot of just mistrust with the population and amongst themselves. So I feel like I've rambled on a little bit about that. So, but yeah, it's just it's a very interesting time in the war that I feel like has just been, when you get into some of the histories, this whole part's kind of glossed over, I feel like. So that's another one of those things. I didn't get the right answer that I wanted, so I'm going to try to answer that myself.
As you do. So Derrick, no, I think you've given us pretty good background here. Now, what are some of the major battles in Kentucky? And that way, that can kind of get us into so the meat and potatoes of your book, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the first big fights is it's called Wildcat Mountain, and that's kind of out in or towards eastern Kentucky, and that is not a big battle at all, but it is one of those battles that it's a Union victory, so it is put out there as this major accomplishment. And then when you look at the casualties, it's like barely double digits. It's not that big of a fight, but it's important. And then a few months after that, you've got Mill Springs, which that's hugely important battle. That kind of really starts to shatter Albert Sidney Johnston's line, especially his eastern flank there. And then nothing really, not a lot of big things happen until the Kentucky campaign in the fall of 1862. And then that's when you start getting things like Battle of Richmond, which that's a fascinating little battle there. It's one of the most overwhelming victories for either side during the war. But that it's short-lived. The Confederates aren't really able to take advantage of this massive victory that they win there. Kirby Smith is in command. But then you have, of course, the Battle of Munfordville. Again, it's not a huge battle, but very, very important for the direction that campaign goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Perryville, where it all culminates. And Perryville is what some people will call the high water mark for the Western theater. I don't know if I agree with that, but that gets thrown out there a lot. And if it helps Perryville get some attention, then then I'm all for it. But yeah, that Perryville it's a short fight, but it is incredibly bloody and just incredibly ferocious. It is some of the most hard fought battles that I've read about from the men that participated. Just absolute carnage. Yeah, and then after that,
also a terribly confusing battle.
Oh yeah, it's
if you watch like the animated map that the ABT does, nothing makes sense.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of confusion. Even the generals there were confused. It's like you've got parts of Confederate divisions mixed up together. It is a complete failure of command at certain levels, and it's parts of the armies fighting each other. Like it's not the entire Army of Mississippi against the entire Army of the Ohio. It's mostly one corps of the Army of the Ohio against a corps and a half of the Army of Mississippi. And so it's but yeah, it's confusing is a good way to put it. And the terrain there is so hilly, which affects what people see and their interpretation of the battle while they're on the field during the fight, which makes it hard for us to sometimes be able to figure out what it is they're talking about, when we're trying to study it and lead tours on it today.
And it's just a beautiful sight too. Bo, did you ever get up that way with me?
I haven't. No.
I think it's one of the best preserved parks
for sure.
And just in terms of what's there, and then the signage now that Blue Gray Education Society has put out there, and that Perryville, the state has been able to put up, it's great.
Yeah, it's a great place. I mean, it's great that it is in the place where it's at. It's not near any really large urban areas, so that urban sprawl has been able to just leave it alone, and I think that's one of the best things for it.
That's nice.
So I think now we've covered a lot of ground already with just background in Kentucky and the war. So let's go ahead and bring on the book and talk a little bit about, you mentioned sort of what got you into it, but how did you just come down to this idea about effectively mounted forces and ununiformed kind of, as I read it, I just felt like this is this almost feels like the oh god, undefeated, right? You know, the kind of like it just feels like no rules, no holds bar warfare. How
Right.
did you? Was it just that got you into the book, or was it, you know, you mentioned your local connection, all these other things? So
Mhm. Yeah, it was mostly the local connection. You know, the final big fight, well, not big, it's big for this, but you know, 800 against 350, that's not really that big. But you know, in terms of what these guys are going through, that's the biggest thing they go through during this little time. But that's the one that took place in my hometown, and so that's where I really started that focus. And as I started researching, you know, looking at the primary sources and reading about whatever's been written about this time period, you know, I kept seeing the term guerrilla that was being used to describe these Confederate men. But the more I researched, the more I realized that these men were not guerrillas. Gorilla is a completely different animal. And so I think in the book I try to talk about, you know, there's this spectrum that you've got. On one end you've got your regular cavalry, on the other end you've got just your basic outlaw, and then close to the outlaw on that spectrum is where you'll find guerrillas, and then closer to the regular cavalry is where you're going to find something called a partisan ranger, which is what these guys were.
mhm,
The reason they're called guerrillas is because they operate pretty irregularly. They do sometimes blend in with the population. They're typically not uniformed, and they have to be completely self-sufficient. They operating behind Union lines, they are not going to get supplied by the Confederate Army. Like that's just it's not going to happen. So anything they have to use, they have to get that themselves. And so these, you know, hit and run tactics, the ambushes they conduct, taking towns and then just disappearing. They are commonly called guerrillas, and that's happening even by the people that are fighting against them. You're just calling them guerrillas because they
mhm,
didn't understand that term. Because partisan rangers are kind of new anyway. You know, the Confederate Congress passed this thing called the Partisan Ranger Act in spring of 1862, and that allowed them to recruit men behind Union lines. Because you know that was something they really wanted to do in Arkansas. They wanted especially do that in Kentucky and somewhat in Tennessee, because there is some untapped manpower potential behind Union lines, and they want to take advantage of
mhm,
that. And so, for the Partisan Ranger Act, this allowed the recruitment of these men, and they have the advantage of being able to fight pretty close to home. Partisan Ranger regiments typically don't travel too far away from their home area. Like they've got their loyal base that helps supply them and give them information. But you know, they are sworn Confederate soldiers. You know, they have to take the oath. They have muster rolls. They have officers. They have NCOs. They have companies. Um, they are organized just like any other Confederate cavalry regiment. They just
mhm,
operate differently. And if they receive orders from the Confederate Army, they have to follow those. And so whenever these men are called into the Army and they end up joining Morgan's brigade and then Morgan's division, you know, they pretty much turn into regular cavalry at that point. Um, Now, some of the men feel like that's uh, I guess, going against the original agreement of getting to fight near home. And so you got a lot of men that do stay behind and they refuse to go. And you can kind of say they do turn into guerrillas, because a guerrilla is somebody that's not a part of either army. They don't follow orders from anybody. They do their own thing, and sometimes they might attach themselves to any sort of regular force that comes through the area. But that's about as far as it goes for them. You know, they're not following orders of the Confederate Army. They're going to do what they want to do. And those are the people that you see typically committing the depredations, especially in 1864 and 1865 Kentucky, where things just, you know, just get really, really nasty.
mhm,
Uh, I like to think of the partisan war of 1862 as very much more civilized than the guerrilla war that takes place in 64, 65. That's
mhm,
when the gloves really come off, and you know, they're not playing nice with each other anymore after that. So yeah, that to make that answer really long there, you know, I really got interested in partisan rangers. You know, who are these men? What makes them different than really everybody else?
mhm.
So, Derek, let's talk about that. What does make them different from everybody else? Because as I've kind of looked through your book as well, is it's very non-traditional style warfare.
Mhm.
And I guess let me add a question onto that. Not only what makes them different, but is it because they are different that makes them so successful?
I think so. Yeah. Because one thing that Adam Johnson's going to do, and I think y'all got a picture of him, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So
There
Adam
you
Rankin Johnson, Henderson, Kentucky native, spends the years before the war on Texas frontier. So he brings a lot of that back. And another little side note, his parents are prominent Unionists in Henderson, which is on
go.
the Ohio River. And two of his brothers joined the Union Army, two of his other brothers joined the Confederate Army. It's one of those classic split Kentucky families. And so being in from that area, that's where he's going to operate. And that is where he is going to raise this regiment. And when he enters Kentucky, it's just him and another guy named Robert Martin, who he called Bob. And Johnson's 28, Martin's 22. Yep, there's Martin. These are some young men, and they have trouble recruiting at first because they served as scouts for Forrest in that winter of 1861-62, which they are very successful at. But they've never really led men before, and so a lot of these little independent bands that are operating, they don't really want to join up with these guys. And so they start doing things to get their name in the paper, really. And so they go from just the two of them in June 1862, and by September they have over 800 men that they've been able to recruit behind Union lines, and which is a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. The thing that really propels them forward is the raid on Newburgh, Indiana. This is going to be the first Union-held town to fall. Union-held town to fall, or Uniontown just altogether. And this story is going to be all over the United States once it's over. You can find this in European newspapers. Like, it makes international news, which after this, when he did this, he only had 40 to 50 men. This explodes his recruitment. And so what he does here is this is going to give him his nickname. His nickname is Stovepipe Johnson. So a lot of people don't know Adam Rankin Johnson, who's that, but they've heard of Stovepipe Johnson. And so what Johnson does is when he takes this town, Newburgh's right on the Ohio River there. There's a warehouse that had all the weapons for the Indiana Legion from that particular county, Warwick County.
Mhm.
And the Legion there is what they call their state militia, the Indiana Legion. They had suffered a lot from Union Army recruitment, so their numbers had shrunk so much, and the war they seemingly gone so far away that they didn't need these weapons anymore. So they recalled them, and they just have them stored in this warehouse. Johnson could definitely use those, and so he, goes across the river. His other men cross a little further upriver, and they take the town. And Johnson tells them, because he doesn't really want to get attacked, because there are a lot of people coming in to push him out of this place. And what he tells them is that if you attack me, or if you shoot at me or anything, I've got two guns on the Kentucky side of the river that have orders to level this town if that's what happens. And so they believe it. After Johnson and his men leave, they find out that these two guns are actually a stovepipe and a charred log. And so this really, I mean, you can imagine to these Indiana, the Hoosiers' chagrin here. They've been bamboozled. I like to use that word with my kids at school, and it's embarrassing for them, as you can imagine. And this makes international news. And so Johnson, from this point on, I mean, he's called Stovepipe Johnson, and that name really pretty much sticks. But one thing that he does, as he starts to generate recruits and his regiment grows, what he'll do every now and then is he'll what he called disbanding them, where they would be in small groups and they would just go hide for several days or a couple weeks at a time. And then they were supposed to rendezvous again at a given point on a given day, and the regiment would come back together again. So that made it extremely difficult for the Union to really be able to do anything about them, unless they got lucky and came across one of these small groups and they could eliminate them. But being able to track all these small groups and then they just appear somewhere was really frustrating for Union commanders in that area, especially some guy named John W. Foster, who I think we've got a picture of, right? So this guy, future Secretary of State of the United States, when President Harrison is going to be in office, and he is kind of the guy that's thrown in by default to take care of the situation. He's a lieutenant colonel of the 25th Indiana, fought at Fort Donelson, fought at Shiloh, and if you look up his letters, really encourage people to do that. I mean, they're great. But excuse me, he happens to be in Evansville, Indiana, because his brother-in-law passed away, and that's when the Newberg raid happens. And so he's like the highest ranking officer around, and it's like, oh, well, guy, you're up. We're gonna put you in charge of this thing. And so he begrudgingly accepts it and is the new commander of the 65th Indiana and every other regiment that comes into this area. And you would think, Union soldiers, they're going to be well armed, well trained. That is not what Foster has to work with. There's a battalion of the 4th Indiana Cavalry that shows up and are sent there. They don't even have long arms yet. They don't even have enough canteens. They haven't even had mounted drill. And within days, they're going to be sent on this raid with Foster that Foster leads to try to destroy Johnson's supplies. And when your enemy has long arms and your cavalry doesn't, that is it's not a recipe for success, I wouldn't imagine.
We need to talk about this man's facial hair here.
Yes.
This is my new favorite thing.
Yeah. The guy is he's got he wrote a few memoirs later on in life too, and one memoir is on I think it's called Letters to My Grandchildren or something along those lines. It's been a while since I've read it. And these guys diplomatic memoirs from when he was Secretary of State, and there's some great stories in there.
That's insane. Let's see that picture again, Joey.
I can do that for you.
Goes from chops to the big stash.
Yeah. Boy, how a war changes you, huh?
It does. It does.
So, Derrick, obviously, fighting in Kentucky is complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think the term Civil War is probably no best put than in Kentucky. So, what exactly do we see, I guess, at the Kentucky home front? How is the civilian population, taking these, although we've kind of talked about how they're not really guerrilla fighters, but that they are kind of conducting guerrilla warfare tactics. How does this have impact on the civilian population of Kentucky?
If you're suspected of helping, it's not going to be good for you. You could have your home burned. You could have the males arrested, or just constantly watched by the local unionists if you happen to be in a unionist type of area. Which the counties around here, especially in Western Kentucky here, I mean, it's like you've got a Confederate county here, you got a Union county here. I mean, it is just spotted all over the place. And the best way to really tell which way a county is going to lean is if you look at on the Library of Congress, they have that map of the United States from 1860 that has the distribution of population of slaves in each county. And the higher percentage of slaves in a particular county typically had more Confederate support. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at the counties with lower slave populations, there's usually more Union support there. So, like, just for example, in Henderson County, which is where Johnson's from, there's a lot of Unionists there, but you get a lot of Confederates coming from that area. And then Davis County, which is right next to it, Henderson had 40.7% of the population was enslaved, and Davis it's 22.7%, right next door. That's definitely split in that area there. But then just to the southeast of Davis County, you have Ohio County, which is where I live currently, and slave population there was only 10%. And you get several Union regiments coming out of that one county. There's some Confederates that are going to join the 9th Kentucky, Norfolk Brigade, but for the vast majority, if you go to little cemeteries around here, I mean, they're all just Union soldiers. Every now and then you'll find a Confederate, but this was a very strong Unionist area, especially just where I'm at right now. But if you go up to Henderson, you're bound to find a lot of Confederate stones up there. So I mean, yeah, it's just people started to not trust their neighbors, sometimes not even their own family members. And in 1862, it's a little bit more mild with the way they deal with this sort of thing with each other. And then in 64 and 65, the rule comes out that any known Confederate supporter that happens to live within a certain radius of whatever some depredation by Confederate guerrillas has been committed, they are thrown in prison and their house can be burned down, whether they had anything to do with it or not. And that is a way to just get the population to completely reject the guerrillas that might be operating in their area, which is kind of successful, but then it drives a lot of people away, at the same time. It's kind of, that kind of punishment. It works for some people, others stiffens them a little bit more.
Real winning hearts and minds.
Right. Right.
So we've got his picture up. Why don't we talk a little bit about John Foster and his raid?
Yeah. So after the Newburgh raid and Johnson's regiment begins to grow, Foster starts to gather some regiments. So he's got the brand new 65th Indiana. They've never been on any sort of long march. They've never even done battalion drill. They've done some company drill, but never battalion level. He's got portions of the 4th Indiana Cavalry, which those are the guys we mentioned earlier, vastly undersupplied. They are nowhere near ready. And then you have a battalion of the 8th Kentucky Cavalry, which there's a lot of local guys in that regiment, but they're on the verge of mutiny because they haven't been paid yet. And the reason they haven't been paid, even though they've been in the service for a while, is the cavalry regiments are typically divided up into 3 battalions, and each of these battalions is a different spot in the state. And the War Department would not pay them unless the regiment was all together. And so you got the governor of Kentucky writing Stanton and Washington, like, you've got to get around this. This is not good. These guys are not going to come together. They have to be in these different areas. And because of a little technicality, you're not paying them, and they're doing good service already. And Stanton still was like, no, that's the rule, which I can just imagine, just the way I would imagine Stanton, just sticking to the rule, and so those men aren't happy, even though they are much better equipped and trained and really got a little bit more experience. But so that's what Foster's dealing with at first. And every now and then he'll get some other unit that comes in for a little bit and then gets pushed somewhere else. But his raid is going to be directed towards Madisonville. So Foster's going to be out of Henderson, Kentucky, on the Ohio River. Madisonville is it's a few dozen miles south, and something that they should probably be able to cover in a day or two. And it takes them like 3 or 4. It's just slow moving. It's August of 1862, and if you've ever read anything about the Kentucky campaign, you've heard about the lack of water, the drought. It's just absolutely awful for anybody that has to march through that. The heat is just insane. And so these men are just dropping out of the ranks, just fainting and, having all these lack of water issues and heat issues. And then he's got, these other couple cavalry battalions that are coming with him. And he's got he's got a section of artillery. And so they're making very slow progress. And the point of going after Madisonville is because Foster had gotten information from some other local Kentuckian that Johnson had been hoarding all of his supplies there in Madisonville. And so Johnson at this time is down in Tennessee. He went down and captured Clarksville, Tennessee from 71st Ohio. A huge win there for him without even having to fire a shot, which that's another amazing story in my opinion anyway. And Johnson gets word of this. And so Johnson splits his command. Half of them go towards Dover, which is where Fort Donelson is, to take out the rest of the 71st Ohio. That fails for a bunch of reasons. But Johnson takes about 200 men north to go to try to fend off Foster long enough for them to get the supplies out. And really what Johnson does here, I hate to throw out this comparison here, but think of Buford at Gettysburg. He's on the ridges, holds them, they get close, he falls back to the next ridge. And it falls back to the next ridge. That's what Johnson is going to be doing on the northern outskirts of Madisonville. He knows his enemy is not exactly mobile. They can't keep up with him. The ones that can keep up with him don't have the range on their weapons because they don't have long arms. So that's what Johnson does. He's deploys skirmishers. They make them deploy their entire regiment out. And then once they start moving, they fall back. And so then they've got to get back into line because they're trying to advance their tobacco fields. They're going through this scrub brush, through these woods. And that is really slow marching and slow moving. And so, he just keeps doing that from ridge to ridge to ridge all the way back. And it holds them up for hours and hours and gives them enough time to get everything out. And so when Foster's men finally do enter Madisonville, there's nothing there for them. So they do find some recently abandoned stores that do have some coffee and some other things they would like to have. So they kind of help themselves to it. And they jokingly start saying among themselves, we're going to hang this person over there just to scare them. And they had no intention of doing that. But they started saying that pretty loudly for people to hear just to freak them out, and which worked. And then they stayed there for a few days and then found nothing. And then very disappointingly headed back north to Henderson.
So I'm kind of curious here, Derek, in your research, if one of these partisan rangers was to get captured,
Mm-hmm.
how are they treated? Because they are non-uniform, are they kind of treated with the sort of a spy mentality? Is it a rogue warrior, aspect?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
Yes, that's a great question. And that is one reason why Adam Johnson is very, very determined to get his muster rolls turned into the War Department in Richmond. Because if his men are captured, he wants to be able to prove that these men are on the rolls. They are sworn Confederate soldiers. That is why he is very strict about his men doing anything crazy in these towns that they go into. They don't want to be acting like guerrillas. They want to be disciplined. Because really for him, his whole success is dependent on good press. And if he starts to get bad press that his men have been doing these just evil things, he's going to lose a lot of that local support that he had.
Mm-hmm.
So he is doing everything he can to not act like your typical guerrilla and to act like a Confederate Army regiment would. And so when his men are captured, they are sent up north into prison camps. Most of them are sent to Camp Morton, which is in Indianapolis at the time. And they're not treated well, I guess you could say, at first. There's several instances where, there's a group of them that got captured. And so they're pretty much being held in a local schoolhouse. Like they're just locked into this thing. And, but Foster's pickets keep getting picked off at night. It wasn't Johnson's men that were doing this, I don't think. It was just some other little local out there he wanted to have his opportunity to take a shot at a Yankee, and I guess he did it. And so Foster kept losing pickets. And so he told the prisoners that, if for every one of my men that gets shot on picket, one of you all is going to get brought out and shot too. And that kind of puts a stop to whatever was going on. There's a letter exchange between Foster and some, I've never been able to track this other guy down. I have no idea who he was, but just some little local guerrilla. And, they're threatening each other and then things just kind of stop. But, these men eventually make it up to Camp Morton. Some of them end up at Camp Douglas. But for the most part, they're treated fairly well. There aren't any examples of these men just being executed on the spot or anything like that. When you get into 64 and 65, that's when you start seeing that sort of thing where you catch a guerrilla, you immediately kill him, or you send him to Louisville where he might be shot up there too. This is a very different war at this point in time. Still pretty early on. The gloves are still on, and so they're just being a little bit more civil with each other because a lot of as they capture Union soldiers, there's no way for them to send them south, and so they have to parole them, and so they fill out parole papers just like a regular Confederate officer would, and hand them to these soldiers, and then they're prisoners on parole, and they have to honor that. And so that was one of the things that he made sure he did to make sure he had that legitimacy as a real Confederate officer.
So after all, we get through 62 and we leave Foster's raid behind. What does this mean for you when you write the book and you're sitting back and you're thinking, okay, I want to make sure that I could tell this story? I think about some of the books that are written on Civil War battles, and you're familiar with them. We always go out, we buy the latest greatest book on X, Y, and Z battle, and it's the Battle of Cowturd Hill, and we go and we read it, and it's like, wow, I actually didn't need to know about this at all, and it doesn't fit into any other narrative at all, and all I've done is read about a bunch of kind of second-rate soldiers and second-rate officers. What makes your Foster's Raid? What makes the story behind We Shall Conquer or Die not one of those, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to sound like I'm saying, it doesn't sound like it's all that important or anything. Like, the types of books I'm talking about where it's like,
Right,
the
yeah.
Battle of Snow Hill, really?
Yeah.
There were like 30 guys there, maybe.
Yeah, there's a book on Wildcat Mountain, and I mean it's several hundred pages long, and you're like, man, that battle lasted just a few hours. It wasn't that big, but it's great for the campaign stuff. But yeah, so and the thing about Foster's Little Raid is only one of the pieces that happens in this larger puzzle of what's going on. Johnson is much more active. He leaves the regiment for a while, like I said earlier, to get these muster rolls to Richmond. So he leaves the regiment command of Martin. Martin tries to replicate a lot of the success that Johnson's had, and where they capture these towns and these Union regiments without a shot. And eventually they're going to get their teeth knocked in at Owensboro, which is, my hometown and where this whole interest for me started. And the Union starts to figure this whole thing out. They figure out that if you actually bring the fight to these guys and you do it well, you don't just do what Foster did, where you get a bunch of untrained guys that don't really know what they're doing, that are only partially equipped. You get a full, well-trained regiment. You get men that are well-trained and disciplined, and you can put these guys out of this region. And that's what they end up doing. Because the thing that really is their undoing is the larger battle that's fought in Owensboro on September 20th, 1862. And, Martin had 800 men. He is attacked by 350 men of the Indiana militia. The Indiana Legion is what they're called. And, they're all infantry. And these 350 guys just steamroll over these 800 Confederates. And the reason is they might be militia. And, a lot of us, we know that militia kind of gets a bad rap. But these men, because of Johnson's raid on Newburgh back in July, these men have been drilling weekly, and they are very well armed. They might not be uniformed, but they are very well armed. And when you look at their rolls, and it tells exactly the type of musket that each company has, and these guys got the good stuff. They got Springfields, they have Enfields, they have Lorenz muskets. They got the good stuff. Some of them even have Henry rifles. And they are very well led too. Their officer is a Mexican War veteran. There's another officer there who just happens to be in the area. He's Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st Indiana Cavalry. He's fought this sort of war before out in Arkansas. And so, where the title comes from, as they're pushing the Confederates off this hill, he says, come on, my brave Indianans, right here we shall conquer or die. And as he's leading this charge up this hill, which must have been a pretty cool sight to see, militia charging up a hill, which is, for that is the only attack or assault that I've been able to find that the Indiana Legion makes in the entire war. They do fight in Morgan in 1863, but they're not doing anything like this bayonet charge. And so they figure it out. If you can be mobile, or if you can hit them quickly when they're not expecting it, and you can have some men that are determined and that are well trained, well equipped, it doesn't really matter your numbers. You can handle these guys and you can push them out. And that's what happens. Because within a few days after this fight in Owensboro, Kentucky, which is on the Ohio River, they're down to south of Hopkinsville, which is at close to the Tennessee line. It's kind of where you imagine where Fort Campbell is today. Yep. That's where they go within like 2 or 3 days. And so it's the Union figures that out, and they start teaming up with the Brownwater Navy to make sure that this stuff isn't happening along the rivers. And the Union. One of the things I really wanted to push towards the end of the book is that, the Union is not stupid. They fail at first, but they are learning along the way, and they are taking their lessons to heart. And then once they're ready, they do the best they do. And, they take care of the problem out here in Western Kentucky.
Hey, Bo, I think you know what time it is.
So, Derrick, in your research leading up to your book, sometimes there's bad history out there, as we all know. And that's effectively what boohickey history is. It's something that people get wrong. It's something that's completely made up, or just something somebody blows way out of proportion. So in your research for this book, what did you find was the boohickey behind Kentucky?
Well, the thing about this history was that there wasn't a lot of secondary stuff written. I mean, there's a couple little things out there, but for the most part, they're okay. I guess for me, it's just calling these guys guerrillas. They're not. They would be offended if you call them a guerrilla, I think. They don't act that way. They don't do those sorts of things. They're sworn soldiers, and that might be the thing. But if I can add my real boohickey, can I do that?
Of course.
For overall Civil War history is probably it's the Braxton Bragg hate. And I see
Are you
that.
Also a fan of the Earl Hess book?
It's convincing to me. I might have some people knocking on my door right now about that, but
no, they're outside Homebrew HQ. I can see 5 pitchforks, 5 burning torches.
Do I smell kerosene?
They're on the way.
Yeah, I'm sending them to Kentucky.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think Dan Masters, when he was talking to you guys, he might have said the same thing. He's like, he's not the kind of guy I want to hang out with, obviously, but like he's not best friends with Jefferson Davis. He's not inept and stupid. He's when you got to really look at the primary sources. You got to look at what actually happens in these battles, and like you think about Perryville. People want to think, well, Bragg threw away the opportunity at Perryville. His subordinates did, and Kirby Smith wasn't wanting to play ball with him the way he was supposed to, and and you're facing the entire Army of the Ohio with only a portion of your army. Of course, you're going to leave, and it's like, they had the tactical victory that day. They would have been stupid to stay there, and if they had stayed there, then he definitely deserves all the hate. But it's like, it's what do you do? What do you do there? And so yeah, it's, I don't know, hoping on your emails on that, but it's I read books and it's like
forwarded them home.
Yeah, and it's like the thing about, well, him and Forrest were going to fight, or Forrest was going to kill Bragg. No, that didn't happen. And you got to look at the sources, and you got to look at, well, where did that source originally come from? That source might be over 100 years old, but sometimes people just make that stuff up. And
I think Lee White gave the best explanation of the Forrest Bragg claim I've ever seen or heard.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he just said, he's like, well, it would be geographically impossible.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
For Forrest to have told him, given that he was X amount of miles away.
Yep.
And then I think Forrest gets like the cult persona.
Yes.
Where it's fashionable to hate on Braxton Bragg. It's fashionable to hate on John Bell Hood. And those same people who hate on both of those people happen to just love NBF.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll never get a positive word out of me on him. But did I let some objectivity out the window just now? Is that
maybe not unwarranted, but
I think you heard the cups clinking. So Derrick, what's in your cup?
Nothing alcoholic tonight. It's hot apple cider is what I had to go with tonight. So it's I'm a big fan of apple cider, hot or cold, and tonight it was the hot version. So I really enjoy a nice hot cup of cider. Or a cold one, on certain nights.
Right, got to. Yeah. So my what's in my cup, or what was earlier, it was made by when I got home, or when Kayla got home, she said, can I make you something to take on the brew? I said, well, of course, surprise me. So she has brought me what she has dubbed fancy chocolate milk. Apparently it is chocolate milk and bourbon cream. And it's actually it's really good. And she's also a fellow Detroit Tigers fan, as we learned before the show. Derrick is also a Detroit Tigers fan. And they're looking pretty good this year, except against the Dodgers. We had a split household for about 3 days or so.
Don't talk to me about baseball right now.
Yeah, well, the Pirates suck, and that's
made it a week.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you guys still have Paul Skeens. I'm surprised you haven't traded him away yet.
We'll sell him for cash soon.
Yeah, it's coming. Don't you worry.
Yeah. When I saw that Jason DeLay got sent away for cash options, I was like, yep, burn the team. Burn the entire team. Just get rid of Skeens. We don't have hope.
Forget a rebuilding year. It's time to just rebuild the franchise.
It's destroy the franchise, and then like Batman, rebuild it brick by brick, but use better bricks and not with Bob Nutting in charge.
So the fact that a Jolly Roger exists must imply that there's a sad Roger that you guys have been raising for the past several years.
Yep, that's all that's left is the sad version. So
Joey, what you got? You got a little something?
What do I have? You're gonna hate me. You're really gonna hate me. This just gets worse every week. Gravity knows no bounds at this point. So I started with this cup, which was the leftover coffee from this morning. And I'll admit, I'm just a lazy person. Like, I'm getting lazier as time goes by. I don't even want to bother with getting the coffee filter and putting coffee grounds in there. I'm past that. I'm done. No. So I've gotten on to instant coffee, and I can see and hear everybody go, whatever. I love it because it's exactly what I want. I turn on the kettle, the water boils, I pour it on some instant coffee. I don't even have to mix it because the hot water just.
The Great Depression is over, Joey.
I don't care. Anyways, I had that, but I finished it. Although we might be heading for another one.
Yeah. The Great Big Sad Part 2, the Electric Boogaloo.
The stock market doesn't even open and it's already fallen 5%. I mean, come on.
Not good, Bob.
Not great. Things aren't great. Everything's fine. It's all fine. But it's fine. But then the second cup, because I had to switch cups midway through, that was mint green tea. It's nice. It's soothing. It's relaxing. It's evening episode of Homebrew History, so I have to relax a little bit, get ready for bedtime. Zhuzh.
Right.
Derrick, where else can we find you? Because this is the best I've got.
Okay, yeah. So I guess you could say I'm the co-administrator of the Western Theater and the Civil War websites. We started that back in 2020. My friend and I, Daryl Smith, started that, and I think we've got over 300 blog posts on there now about Western theater history, and some small action, some larger stuff. I think with the Shiloh anniversary the last couple of days, and several just some stuff on that. But last year we started our podcast, the Department Number 2 podcast, which we thought is a pretty cool name considering the West was called Department Number 2. And I don't know if anyone's caught on to that. I haven't got any comments, but I'll assume everyone just knows it. But we started that last year, and then took several months break because I was moving, and then the school year started and soccer season started. All this stuff started. This year we've been able to get more on track. And Joel, you've been on there a few times, and
twice, 3 times?
3 times, right?
Yeah.
We did Franklin once, and then we did Wagner for 2 episodes. But yeah, it's good stuff.
Wagner for 2 episodes? That's insane. Crazy.
Yeah, that was good stuff there. And so we started that, and we've gotten a little bit more frequent and regular with that as our schedules allow. I've got the little ones, and their schedules determine my schedules usually. And then so that's our website's westerntheatercivilwar.com, and you can find links to the podcast on there. Podcast episodes are on YouTube too, Spotify, really anywhere you listen to them. And then I've got my own personal sites. It's Kentucky Civil War Author. I think I started that back in like 2017 because I knew one day I was going to have a book, and I wanted to have something to say, here it is, it's here now. And so I wrote a bunch of little small articles on Kentucky related subjects from the war and topics. And I don't really write a whole lot on there anymore. I kind of just use it as, here's my speaking schedule. Here's where you can find the book and buy the book. And then, by the way, here's the Western Theater site. Go there. That's where I really put a lot of my energy, and I guess you could say, whenever time allows.
Well, Derrick, we're going to put all of that down in the description for number 2, and I can personally vouch for the quality of Department Number 2 podcast, having done 2 of them,
thank you.
3 of them, whatever it was. And then 2, I started out writing for Western Theater and Civil War, and then
on Altoona and Franklin and New Orleans.
Yeah, a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
Bo, I don't know about you. I feel like we've pretty much covered all the ground that we can cover.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts there, Derrick?
No, I just really appreciate you guys having me on here. Fan of the show, and now I finally get to be on it. It's a dream come true.
A fan of the show.
You need better dreams, Derrick.
I've made it. I've peaked. So
this is it.
Yeah,
forget the book.
Yeah, it's all downhill from here.
Yeah.
where can people get the book?
So yeah, you can get it at from a publisher, Savas-Beatie, and you can find it on their website and savasbeatie.com. You can get it on Amazon and Borders, and well, I don't know if Borders is even a thing anymore, but anywhere you buy books online, you can find it there.
There we go.
Yeah, and then if you see me at some sort of speaking event or battlefield, I've usually got a box of them in my car, and you can buy them straight from me too. So it's whatever works.
Well, Derrick, thanks for coming on. Bo, always a pleasure. And on behalf of everybody here in Homebrew History, thanks for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, y'all stay dry up there, Derrick.
Might need the arc.
All right, guys, that was great.